Twaweza is a 10-year initiative. It's a big experiment to try out some key ideas. And the main idea here is that what happens if you give millions of citizens in East Africa, in Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, access to information? Will it help them be able to do more things with their lives, to have more options, to have more ideas, to be able to have greater aspirations, and to find more practical tools to solve their own problems? And what's core behind Twaweza's idea is that it's not about filling gaps. It's not about figuring out what's missing and then somehow trying to fill that. Rather, it takes development upside down and it says, what's working? What are people already doing? What's really working well in people's lives? And can we get behind that and put more wind behind those sails so that people can do more? When we went around East Africa, what we noticed was that while a lot of development wasn't working so well, a lot of public institutions weren't working so well, people weren't just sitting around waiting for somebody to come save them. People were getting on and doing things. And when we asked and looked as to what was working for people, we found that it was things like mobile telephony, mass media, fast-moving consumer goods, business. Those sorts of things were working for people. And what we decided to do is to say, well, if this is what's working, if this is what's meaningful to people, if this is what's relevant and reaches lots of people across the whole country, then why not work with that and get behind it and kind of create these win-win partnerships where what is already working can work better. So that's what Twaweza is about. We're trying lots of new things out. A whole bunch work, a whole bunch don't. And so we have to constantly read the signs and tweak and go along. And time will tell whether this approach is more effective than some of the other ones. What this means is a somewhat different way of doing development than how many of us have done it in the past. First, you see, often what we used to do is to say, let's do all the research and the thinking and then come up with a perfect plan. Put it in a careful log frame where you say, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm expecting that, and then I'm going to measure it like that. And kind of line it all up, and just once you've planned it really well, you just implement it carefully without any changes from beginning to end. Well, we know that that actually doesn't work. Why? Because the world is very dynamic. What you thought was right may not be right. What worked this year may not work next year. What might have worked in one context doesn't quite work somewhere else. And what might have happened is a whole bunch of new opportunities came up that didn't exist in the past, and the best way to make a difference now may be to grab those opportunities. So the model of development that I think makes sense now is not one that says do your careful planning where you get all the information right at the beginning and then just implement. But it's rather about being very contingent, being very modest at one level and say that, I don't have the answer to a lot of questions, but I have enough to go by. I have done some careful thinking. I have some good evidence that I'm basing things on. I have some hunches, and you be honest about what is evidence and what are hunches. And you say, I'm going to try this, and my confidence comes not from having a great plan, but my confidence comes from having a clear theory of change and having very good quick feedback systems. So I try something, and I get feedback very quickly and right away, and I use that feedback to improve and tweak, or in some cases, ditch the whole thing and start again, depending on what feedback you get and what it's telling you. So again, the confidence or the assurance we give to ourselves, to the people we work with, to our donors, is about having very good feedback systems and a nimble, agile system that is able to take that feedback quickly into account, make the adjustments that are necessary, and proceed. And all the time, because you're getting feedback from the people who matter the most, the beneficiaries and the people who are supposed to benefit. And that sort of feedback is more valuable than all the other indicators that you might have used in the past. So it's a much more fluid, it's a much more contingent, it's a much more reflexive way of working, where success is characterized by a system that is able to take in feedback and make continual adjustments and adaptations rather than having got a perfect plan at the beginning. Now you could ask, well, what does that mean in terms of monitoring, in terms of evaluation, in terms of success? I'm a believer in two things that might, on the face of it, sound contradictory, but I think are not. One is that I do believe one needs to be very clear about the ultimate prize. what is the outcomes you're looking for? So let's not count sandwiches, let's not count all the inputs and the outputs, and so on. Let's be very clear about what is the outcome we seek, and the defining of that outcome is really important to do well. A good example is education. Let's say basic education. For a long time, we defined the measure as enrollment. And enrollment is an important one, but in the end it's not a very good measure, because all it tells you is how many names are on a list at the beginning of the year. And that's why the many governments, many donors, many of us have spent a lot of energy getting names to be on a piece of paper, rather than asking the deeper question about, are these children in school and are they in fact learning? So enrollment rates have shot up, meaning names on a piece of paper have shot up, but we have very little sense of whether they are actually in school, and more importantly, whether they are learning. So defining the outcome, or redefining the outcome in this case, in terms of how many children are learning, and you can define that further in terms of, for example, basic literacy and numeracy, how many children can read and count at the early grade level, is sharpening the outcome. And it's very important to get the outcome right. And I'm not a kind of touchy-feely, mushy guy saying, well, let's just do it, process matters. No, outcomes matter, results matter a lot, but the ultimate results and the ultimate outcomes matter. Then, in terms of how we get from here to there, I think it's very important to have a clear theory of change, to articulate what are your assumptions, what is your reading of the political economy, about the drivers of change, about the constraints. How do you think, what will it take to make things, make a difference, and for you to get from where we are now to the ultimate outcome that you seek? And I think that theory of change should be very clearly articulated. It doesn't need to be set in stone. You can tweak and adjust it as you go along. There's new information, new ideas that come. Some of your ideas can be disproven. But as long as we are working in a somewhat conscious and transparent way along this theory of change, then I believe in a lot of flexibility should be given to the organization to determine and to make the adjustments of how they get from here to there. A mistake that's made in development often is that there is this kind of false sense of certainty that people demand, that NGOs demand from themselves, donors demand of NGOs and others, which is to say, fix it all, as if somehow that will make sure that the risks will go down. The risks don't go down. The risks, in fact, increase, because what you're telling people is, I want something very rigid and clunky, and goddamn stick to it, regardless of what the evidence tells you. And somehow we all feel better for it. When in fact, what then starts happening is when the evidence doesn't reflect what you hoped it will reflect, and you don't have an opportunity to make the adjustments, we all start fudging. And then the incentives on both the NGOs and the donors are to pretend it's working well, to put a spin to it, and then we start getting it being dishonest. Whereas the much more honest thing would be to say, it didn't work the way we thought it would work because of this and that. But we've thought hard about it, and we've asked for this evidence, and we've read what works somewhere else, and that's why we want to make this tweak. So a transparent, reflexive process with maximum space and flexibility for the implementer to make adjustments, as long as you're accountable in the medium to long term towards the progress you're making, in terms of the progress you're making towards that outcome. I think what is important is